Hi, and welcome to my mock proposal defense. My name is Michelle Poast, and I am part of the doctoral program for developmental education administration, cohort number 3. And the name of my proposed dissertation is Multiplication Facts and the Intermediate Algebra Student, a journal-ready proposal. And just as a side note, I'm very tired, so that it would seem consistent with how I'll probably feel during my real proposal defense. So for starters, I just wanted to give a little bit of background knowledge as to what motivated me to do this study and to talk about multiplication fact automaticity. So for my research, I'm defining multiplication fact automaticity as the ability for a person to be able to know their multiplication facts from zeros to nines in a manner of not needing to actually compute the problem. So for instance, if when you first learn to drive a car, you pay attention to the pedals and the steering wheel and the street lights and the other cars around you, and eventually as you develop automaticity, you can drive from home to work and not even remember what you did. So it literally puts the information into a different part of the brain so that it doesn't require much effort from the brain in order to figure it out. So that's for for the purposes of this study, that's what I'm looking for in multiplication fact automaticity. With that, I really wanted to look at 3 different areas that are potentially impacted by multiplication fact automaticity. The first has to do with the institutional impact. Those are the typical questions about retention and success in class, and decisions about whether to delay taking a math class, and whether or not attendance is going to be good, and all those kinds of things that sort of are the typical questions surrounding math at the post-secondary level. The second part is more about the curricular impact. So I'm thinking about not a timeline, but like a continuum of mathematical skills, and where multiplication fact memorization and automaticity, where it fits within that continuum. So I'm going to take a look just before it, some skills that a person would need to know in order to be able to learn their times tables better, and then skills that follow it. And then finally, I want to look at the human impact, the actual experiences of the students who are going through these difficult courses. So this is a journal-ready dissertation that I'm proposing. It has 5 chapters, and of course the first and last are the introduction and conclusion, and then the middle 3 are the somewhat independent studies that all fall along the same theme of multiplication fact automaticity. Chapter 2, I've titled The Influence of Multiplication Fact Automaticity. The literature review for this particular study is really more about other research that have to do with those common questions that are happening in post-secondary education about retention and success in mathematics, and attendance levels, and prerequisite scores for placement, and those kinds of things. The statement of the problem is really, I can be brief and just say the problem is people aren't getting through math, and it's causing issues because math for many degrees is required. Certainly at my institution, every degree requires at least 1 math course, and many students are coming into the post-secondary level without the skills to do college level math, and so we have developmental math courses, and oftentimes students don't pass, or it takes them several semesters to pass, which delays their entire degree completion, and sometimes influences them to not complete their degree at all. So obviously that can be more concise in my dissertation, but that's really the statement of the problem. The purpose of this particular study is to really look at how multiplication facts perhaps influence some of those areas that are of concern right now in developmental education and in higher education in general. So issues of placement scores and how well the students do in chapter tests and whether or not they withdraw and whether or not they attend class, and how each of those components is related to their knowledge of multiplication facts. The theoretical framework that I've chosen for this is cognitive load theory, and to me it just describes every classroom that I'm in when I'm teaching developmental math. There's basically two components that are described in cognitive load theory. There's the working memory and then the long-term memory. And the point is that our working memory is a finite space in our brain that holds information, and it gets overloaded on a regular basis. And when our brains get overloaded, we stop the learning process. We get frustrated. We sometimes get discouraged. We have to stop and step away until we can figure out how to unload our brain. But then there's the long-term memory, and as far as scientists know, that we have an unlimited space in our long-term memory. No one has yet to discover what the limits are of our long-term memory. So the idea is that the more information we can get into the long-term memory in a level of automation or attached to schemas that are already there, then the less we need our working memory to be utilized when those particular pieces of information are needed. So I think this is a really neat lens to look at this concept of mathematics and multiplication tables. What I'm interested in is if a person has multiplication fact automaticity, and so it is therefore residing in their long-term memory, then it frees up their working memory so that they can learn the new concepts and the more complex problems without having to stop in the middle of the problem and do other nested problems of multiplication facts and factoring. So I have 6 research questions for this particular study. The first 5 all start the same way. What is the relationship between the scores of the MFA test and whatever that particular DV is? My dependent variables are the placement scores that got them into the class, the time that's lapsed in between when they registered for school and when they registered for their first math class, an affect questionnaire that really speaks to kind of their own personal opinion of their overwhelm or their likes or dislikes about mathematics, and then 3 of the chapter tests and attendance. Then the 6th research question speaks to the withdraw decision. It says, to what extent do the scores of students who withdrew and students who did not withdraw from the intermediate algebra course differ on the MFA test? So my research design is quantitative, non-experimental. My participants, I will use propositive sampling, and I'm anticipating about 1,500 students. My plan is in fall of 2017 to basically to include all the students who are taking intermediate algebra at the institution where I work, with the exception of the students in my classes, just so that we have more objectivity. And they will be administered these tests, basically the MFA tests and an affect questionnaire, during the first week of the semester. It'll be administered using the computers that are already in the classrooms. My math lab is what we use to teach the classes. That's where they do their homework. That's where they do their tests. So these particular instruments that I'm creating will be delivered via my math lab in the students' classrooms by their teachers, be proctored by their teachers. Obviously, the students have an option. They don't have to take it. There will be some sort of incentive for them to take it and try to do their best. And of course, this is all pending IRB approval from both Dixie State University, which is where I work, as well as Sam Houston State University. I anticipate that the entire study, that all my data can be collected during the fall 2017 semester so that I can then start working on my analyses shortly after that. I plan on having descriptive statistics as well as using the Pearson R and the independent T for this study. Okay, so chapter 3 is called Multiplication Fact Automaticity and the Continuum of Skills. Now this one, I haven't developed this one quite as well as I did chapter 2, but the literature review is going to be a little more focused on how different mathematical skills precede other mathematical skills, that it's a building block. So I'm going to be looking for literature that speaks to that. The statement of the problem is generally the same, that people aren't passing math class or they're struggling and it's often impeding them from finishing their degrees. The purpose of this particular study is to look at the connection between some skills that precede math or multiplication test memorization and then skills in the intermediate algebra course that are very dependent on a person knowing their multiplication tables and how to factor things. The educational significance, I don't think I talked about this in the first or in chapter 2, but the significance is that the more we can learn about what's working and what's not working in the developmental math courses, the more we can make informative decisions about how to design our curriculum and address these issues and work with the students. The theoretical framework is Bloom's taxonomy. It's very very consistent with this idea of these building blocks and using small pieces of information to build the person's capacity to handle more complex problems. Research questions, I have 4 of them, and 2 of them pertain to the problems that precede multiplication fact automaticity, and then the other 2 are ones that are in the intermediate algebra course that depend heavily on a person's ability to know their times tables. The participants would be the same. This is also a quantitative non-experimental study, and the only instrument that's different from what I had spoke of before is a skills test that will actually measure their ability to do the preceding questions, the arrays and the set questions, and then we will take from the chapter 5-6 test the questions that pertain to the factoring. For the analysis, I'll be obviously doing descriptive statistics as well as a canonical correlation analysis. My dissertation chair is Dr. Linda Zentek, and she's got some very nice experience using the CCA, and I think that this will be a really neat study to work on with her. So chapter 4 is called The Lived Experiences of Intermediate Algebra Withdrawal Students. The literature review will be focusing more on people's lived experiences of intermediate algebra, of mathematics, of traumas, phobias, anxieties, all those things that people experience when it comes to math, and pleasure as well. Statement of the problem, again, pretty much the same problem, that we have a problem nationwide when it comes to math skills with students trying to go to college. The purpose of this study is really to understand better the lived experience of people who chose to withdraw from the intermediate algebra course. Again, the educational significance is hopefully going to help us to decide how to design our courses to meet our students' needs in a more effective way. The theoretical framework that I chose is symbolic interactionism, which really has to deal with the fact that everybody's perception is different, and based on items in the classroom, based on body language, based on verbiage, based on all kinds of things, we as humans glean meaning, and of course everybody's meaning is somewhat different from everybody else's because we're all individuals, but that meaning that we glean causes us to take action, and of course the good news is that we can change that. And so the hope is that we can learn as educators how to change the symbols that are happening in the classrooms so that people can get through the math with less trauma, anxiety, and lack of motivation. So I have 4 research questions, and I'm just about out of time, so I'll just briefly say it has to do with looking at 3 people who withdrew who did poorly on the MFA test and 3 people who withdrew who did well on the MFA test, and interviewing them to sort of figure out if there are differences among those 2 groups. So for the participants, I'll have 6 people. This is a stratified purposive sampling. It's a qualitative phenomenological study, and I'll include the role of the researcher in my design. The instrument will be the interviews, and my analysis will include transcriptions, coding, and looking for emerging themes. So this concludes my mock presentation of my proposal defense. I'm hoping to have this be a real defense in maybe April. So I have a timeline, and I'm working with Dr. Zentek, and I'm feeling really great about it, and I appreciate this entire program that we've gone through, and especially you, Dr. Skidmore. Thank you so much for your support.